So first, yeah, I'd love to hear about you a little bit. Like specifically, I'd love to hear a little bit about your background and that how that kind of brought you to Dosu and kind of the founding story of the company.
Yeah. So I guess in terms of background, I started off kind of my career on product engineering side of things, so full stack, and have always kind of been very involved with kind of the end users. So in my first role, I helped kind of run all of our product analytics and kind of in-app support, trying to convert users from free plans to paid plans. And basically, like the context was our team was at DocuSign. We, it was typically very large enterprise customers, and our goal was to essentially fork the app and treat it like a B2C product to try improve traction within the small and medium business sector. And so, as doing that, I got to work really closely with design, product support, and user research on trying to understand users, and then also trying to help them understand ways of how what product features would improve the improve conversions to paid plans, or decrease time to send, increase usability. So that was a lot of very cross functional, and that has continued throughout my career. From there, I joined a startup as the first employee. And so worked really closely with all of our customers in the Bay Area, going to their offices, seeing how they're using the product, and then kind of bringing that back in for product development. And then I joined another startup, and I guess it kind of followed. It was a slightly different role; it was much more infrastructure focused. And so, started off building the infrastructure to onboard other machine learning engineers and data scientists to the company. And then over time, as the company grew, I shifted kind of back towards the customer. So what started off as infrastructure and data engineering, then meant building out first backend services that expose data back to our customers, then our front end, and then kind of helping run the team that interfaced with the customers. And through both that and through open source, I've always kind of, I guess this role that I've played, and kind of the origin of Dosu is I've been the go-to person for technical questions at companies, because I've had this shared context across product, customers, and engineering. So, also as being an early engineer, I had a lot of context generally about how we got to the place that we are, the design decisions we made. And so when I started kind of exploring, LLMs and GPT-4, I, like most engineers, were drawn to its coding ability, but kind of reflecting on my role, it's well, what else do I do as an engineer? A lot of people are focused on code generation, but I don't spend all of my time coding, and a lot of kind of my time was spent helping interface with these teams that interact with engineering. So, if a product manager is asking hey, what metrics do we track on this web page? That may be documented somewhere, but in all likelihood, it just lives in the code, and code can tell you whether or not something's actually implemented. Or support is talking to a customer, and they get they're running into an issue, and they want to know, did we ship anything in the past week that could be impacting them or causing this issue? Or even just what types of follow-up questions should I ask the customer to figure out if this is on their end or if this is on our end? And then similarly, being on sales calls, trying to be customers describing their system, and trying to understand hey, do we support this type of integration or this type of request that they need given our current state of product. And so Dosu is very much focused on kind of the interfaces with engineering. And so how do we make and unlock engineering knowledge to the rest of the organization? So, engineers are expensive, but right now, they are the only ones who can read and understand code and code changes. And so how do we make that information more accessible, and then slowly build from there? So first, it's about how do we make engineering knowledge more accessible, but then can we also make engineering skills? Can we empower support to triage bugs on their own without looping in engineering? Can we make it so a product manager can add analytics to a certain web page, or make a PR to do so? And yeah, so that's kind of the vision of the company. And the way we have started Dosu and the kind of the current product today is actually very focused on open source. Through my prior roles, I've gotten very involved in open source. I've been a maintainer of several projects for a number of years now. And there's a lot of nice parallels between your role as an open source maintainer and this one that I would play within companies, where as a maintainer, you are the expert of that repository. You have an understanding of the history, the context of how it is where it is today, previous issues, common issues that people run into, and kind of an understanding of the code base. And then you have users who are still technical, but less technical. And they come to you asking questions that are ambiguous from documentation, but can be answered by code or code changes. Come to you with issues and trying to figure out if they're doing something wrong or if something recently changed with the code base, similar to that support workflow. And then you also have people coming being like, I love this library, but I would also like this additional feature. So you also have that product manager mindset. And also within open source, maintainer burnout is like a very top of mind topic right now, as well as maintainer compensation, because this support burden is pretty significant and time intensive. So Dosu has been very well received within open source for that reason.
That's awesome. So tell me a little bit about kind of the founding story here. Did you, when you were coming up with the idea, or before even the idea, like, were you going out there being like, hey, I want to start a company, and this idea was part of a broader set of ideas that you tried, or was it vice versa, where you came across this and you were like, oh, I need to go start a company to kind of productize it?
A bit of both. I have always wanted to start my own company. It's largely kind of, I guess my career is a reflection of that. I joined an early stage startup. I first started at a large company, kind of getting an understanding of what does, a company look like that has been successful, and then joined an early stage company as a first engineer and then as a second engineer, trying to get an understanding of like, okay, what does it take to take an idea to product, like to market, and all the pitfalls and challenges associated with that. So in terms of timing, I felt very ready, and I've been like kind of looking for opportunities. And then when I actually got involved with LLMs and OpenAI, somewhat related to Wellfound, about a few years ago. So this was pre-ChatGPT era. And I was interested in, at the time, I received a lot of recruiting inbound. And what I wanted to do was build a auto labeler. So I would auto label all of my recruiting emails and then extract information from those emails into a personalized job board. And so I fine-tuned one of OpenAI's models at the time. I think it was the Atom model, the smallest model, on all of my recruiting emails, and then set it up so it would auto-label them. And then I fine-tuned another model to do the job information extraction. And in doing that, coming from a traditional ML background, I was like, wow, working with LLMs is so much easier than it is with kind of traditional machine learning, where at Viaduct, we were dealing with terabytes of data, very messy, noisy, coming from like real world sensors. And so experimentation, getting things off the ground is very hard, versus when you're dealing with text is abundant. And, the amount of data you're dealing with is like, in the order of hundreds or thousands of examples rather than, millions. So that kind of made me very excited about the space, and I've been kind of following it because of that. And then when GPT-4 came out, I, like most engineers, went to like, holy shit, this could do my job, and focused actually on the kind of PR generation aspect. But my opinion, after like kind of creating with a nice demo of that within a small Next.js repository or a small API repository, it worked quite well. But as I scaled it up and talked to developers, my opinion became that automatic PR generation is kind of like a self-driving car, in that it looks very, very close. You can see it, but that last 10, 20% is going to take a really long time, because until you can fully generate that PR and just have it merge without review by a human, you put a lot of work on the developer again to then review that PR, think about the design decisions, and then probably it's not correct. And they have two choices. One is they have to check out the branch and do it themselves, or they go back and forth with an AI. And so I was like, from a developer experience perspective, I'm much more bullish on the in IDE kind of, you are building with an AI versus the AI just builds it for you.
Yeah.
So then I took a step back and was like, okay, well, what else do I do as an engineer? And that's kind of where I shifted the focus to engineering knowledge work.
That's cool. And so you started the company. Tell me a little bit about kind of that process. Like what has been, so this is the first company you've started, so I'm sure you have to learn a lot. Like what are some of the surprises that you've had kind of on this journey so far?
Yeah, there's been a lot. I mean, even within like, so an interesting thing. So I started the company and, the first question, especially because it's all very new and working in the ML domain, the most important thing was like get usage. So like launch early and gather data. And so that's kind of what drew me to open source is it's public domain. I know it's a problem because I'm a maintainer and it really resonated when I talked to companies. So it was a really good starting point. And what's been really unexpected is it's also been like an amazing distribution channel, is that people like very unexpectedly will Google their issue with a library, end up on a GitHub issue that Dosu has helped resolve, and then they reach out about Dosu. So that's been like kind of like a very unexpected learning. And I mean, generally beyond that, I mean, there's so much to learn.
Yeah.
I think Yeah, I think a big thing has just been like, I guess launching early and getting feedback has been the most important thing, which I guess I kind of knew, but doing it like myself versus an
Yeah.
early employee has been slightly different.
Yeah.
Hiring obviously is incredibly difficult. I think I am fortunate in that I'm technical, and so I could do a lot as alone. But at a certain point, I realized like, okay, no, I need to focus on
Mhm.
hiring, scale this out.
Yeah. Can you talk to me a little bit about what the team looks like currently and like are you a single co-founder or founder or do you have a co-founder?
Yeah, I'm a solo founder. So yeah, so it started with just me, and then kind of from there, I was looking for other engineers to join me. I think Dose is very technical. We work kind of serving developers, and so I think it was very important for me for the early team. Both actually, I wanted the product to be something that developers resonate with. That was kind of important for the company I wanted to build because I find when developers are working on a product that they understand and have empathy towards the problem, they're able to help drive the product roadmap in a way where if you're working on something that is very far away from software development or product development, it's sometimes hard for engineers to contribute to the product process. So I wanted the early team to be engineering centric. And so, looking for that first engineer is extremely challenging. I guess having been the first and second engineer, I was aware of the type of person that is well suited for that role and also how hard they are to find. And so, you know, the team as of now, we're a team of five, all engineers currently across the globe, but everyone's moving to San
Awesome.
Francisco. So, kind of bringing it back to like, but yeah, like originally, like kind of looking for that person, went through network, both personal, through friends, and well, yeah, was able to find like someone who, I mean, like in terms of qualities I was looking for an early engineer, I think there you have to be kind of crazy to join a early stage startup.
Right.
Like that is just that's a fact. And so the motivating reasons generally to join an early stage startup is one, you've started your own company before and you either don't want to kind of be in the driver's seat again, but you love the process of building a company. Or the flip side is you haven't started your own company, but someday you want to. And joining an early stage startup is a great way to experience that and without kind of the being in the driver's seat where you're able to kind of watch from a distance, but also help drive a lot of the company decisions. So yeah, so I think those like kind of qualities in terms of
Yeah.
ambitions, like those were really really important for the initial hires. Also, I think working in the LLM space, there everything's very new, and I think as you kind of there's a lot of more senior engineers that I think maybe have like a fear of new things or like kind of are set in their ways, and so it was really important to find engineers that I felt were like comfortable with not knowing that we're working on problems that aren't solved. Like a lot of the things that we're working on, there hasn't been much research on,
Yeah.
or maybe there's going to be a paper that comes out in a few weeks about a
Right.
similar topic.
Yeah.
And so being able to kind of trust your gut and be like comfortable with that level of ambiguity and uncertainty, but just approach the problem from first principles was really important.
How do you search for that? Like, is that something that you can look for in a profile that's put in front of you? Is that something you have to have a conversation with people? And, how do you suss it out?
Yeah, I think a lot of it is hard to come from a profile. I would say in conversations, the things that do stand out in profiles, I think, is kind of pursuing your own projects or that are maybe like not that connected to your job, but you do
Hmm.
it because you find them really interesting. And so, like one of the engineers like worked on building their own mechanical like split keyboard, for example. Like
Right.
that, it's not necessarily related to their job, but it was like a curiosity. It's something that's
Right.
very challenging. You have to learn a lot of new skills, but you think it would be fun, and so you do it. And so I think that like level of curiosity and like interested in learning in new domains often can kind of be reflected in what they do, both in work and outside of it. So I think that's important. Also, it's something that I resonate with. Like, prior to starting Dosu, I'm the type of engineer that spends every weekend like working on other side projects that I find technically interesting.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, I think that is also important. And then like otherwise, I think it's really, in terms of, asking people what they are like looking for in their career. It's like I think people are like fairly transparent or like, willing to talk about what motivates them. And yeah.
Yeah. Are there, throughout this process, have you, or just throughout your career, do you have any like thoughts on hiring in terms of like hacks or like not even hacks, but like uncommon knowledge or things that like you believe that others don't like, or just advice for people as they're kind of building their early teams?
Yeah, I don't think there are hacks, unfortunately.
Sure.
I wish there were. I mean, I really think like trusting your gut, as silly as that is, I think is really important. Hiring's hard. You're gonna probably get it wrong, but it's most important is just to learn and try like write down kind of learnings when you do get it wrong and kind of internalize that. I also think like adaptability is really important. Like it's cliche, but hiring for kind of that growth curve or that willingness, like what, especially when you're hiring early stage, like what someone's going to be working on is going to change dramatically
Yeah.
over the course of even months. And so someone who has either like kind of shows some level of excitement about that kind of dynamicism or just like yeah has shown in their career that they've been able to shift in terms of the types of engineering work they've done, I think is really important.
Makes sense. How do you think about, one of the things that I think is a struggle for a lot of early stage companies is that, there's no guarantee of success. Generally, most engineers will be taking a decent pay cut, if not a massive pay cut. And, you still want to get really good, capable people. So, like, what has been your way of like getting people excited and convinced to kind of take these risks? Or are you searching for a specific archetype? It seemed like you mentioned that like is already
Yeah.
excited about these risks.
Yeah, I think it's a combination. One, it is looking for people that are excited about the risks because they are inherent.
Yeah.
And, the reasons to join an early stage startup are really because you're going to learn more than you would
Yeah.
anywhere else, especially if you want to start your own company.
Yeah.
So I think that is like an easy way to filter. But in terms of like kind of selling the opportunity, I think that we're very fortunate in that we are working on something and we're hiring for engineers that
Yeah.
most engineers really like the product really resonates with them.
Right.
And it's also very clear that kind of this is the future
Yeah.
in terms of the potential impact, whether or not like Dosu is the exact same as we see it today in like a couple of years. Kind of the problem space that we're tackling of how do we enable other people to participate in the product development process and kind of make engineering knowledge more accessible. That's like a fundamental friction to how companies grow. Like as you grow, you slow down because of knowledge silos.
Right.
And instead of one person being able to do everything, it takes three or five. And so it's like a very fundamental problem to productivity as companies scale. And so I think it's like a very interesting problem space.
Yeah.
I think that resonates where even if we don't know exactly what the product will be in a few years, the problem space I think is very important and will be around. So
Makes sense. So talk to me a little bit about what the hiring process looked like before RC or before you worked with us? Like, it seems like referrals was a big piece. What else were you doing to find talent?
Yeah, so it started off mostly referral based. And so just working the network. And I think that is the best way to start. And then at a certain point, that network is exhausted. I also think that I'm at a point in kind of my career that a lot of my peers fell into two buckets, which is one, they are trying to start their own company, or they are like, actually, I'm done with the startup thing
Right.
and I want to work at
Yeah.
a much more stable company.
Right.
And so I think that was exhausted. My network was exhausted more quickly because of that.
Yeah.
From there, I started doing kind of outbound myself on LinkedIn.
Yeah.
So trying to find people that worked at companies that I think would have kind of people with relevant skill sets, and reaching out to them. The problem there was it ended up being very, very time consuming. And especially as a solo founder, it's the biggest burden is when I'm not doing like product development,
Yeah.
nothing's
Right.
moving on the product.
Yeah.
So that ended up becoming a bit too time consuming. So I was like, okay, what other recruiting platforms or third party recruiters could help? And so I had a referral for kind of a third party recruiter. So I started off with like a traditional contingency recruiter setup. And what I found was I lacked kind of control in that process, which I think maybe is very either a founder thing or an engineering thing where I wanted more visibility into how that the third party recruiter was working and the ability to also like shift kind of focus more quickly. And I didn't feel like I had that. And then I realized that, I had previously been working on like recruiting technologies and AI and recruiting. And so I was like, okay, like I personally believe that kind of the AI is going to fundamentally change the way we do recruiting and generally like outbound and email communication is going to change.
Yeah.
And so I was very keen on trying out a platform that has the same kind of vision. And so I had seen Recruiter Cloud, I think in the Wellfound newsletter. And so I was like, okay, this seems like something worth trying out.
Yeah. So talk to me a little bit about, one question I've found is useful is like when, after your experience with Recruiter Cloud, like just kind of to summarize it, it's like, who would you recommend it to? What would you kind of say? Like, is there a specific type of person and specific type of pain point, as well as like, how would it work well for them?
I think for early stage startups, if you, it's like a no-brainer in my opinion, mostly because once you've exhausted your network, especially as early stage, you just don't have the resources and time to invest in kind of doing recruiting yourself. You might be able to, but like to the level that you need to, I don't think it's there. And what I really liked about Recruiter Cloud is the workflow of like candidates appearing in Slack and also being able to be very specific and see that get that feedback loop pretty quickly in terms of like, hey, these are the criteria that I'm looking for. In our case, like people who have founding engineering experience or who have started their company previously. That's a very specific LinkedIn query, like,
Yeah.
and that, with Recruiter Cloud, like we were able to get that feedback of like, hey, are these the right type of people within like a week or two? And then if not, adjust. And so I think if you know what you're looking for, and if you are trying to, I guess, save time where like you are the person doing the recruiting, um, I think Recruiter Cloud makes a ton of sense. Because basically, like I was doing those LinkedIn queries
Right.
before,
Right.
and so it helped.
Is there Are there specific things that have, beyond that, have made your life
Mhm.
easier? Like specifically, like one of the things you mentioned, actually, before we jumped into the life easier, one of the things you mentioned with your issue with the third party contingency recruiters was the fact that you didn't have kind of visibility into what was going on. Has that changed with Recruiter Cloud at all?
Yeah, so I think there's a lot more feedback because I feel like candidates popping up, both like working with the Wellfound team as well. Like they are very good about making sure that the search is like well scoped. I actually really like the kind of reject reason. I think the options are fairly well done in terms of reasons to reject a candidate and helping tie that back into how the search is going. I guess those are the main ones.
Yeah. Is there any way that any other things that have kind of made your life easier, anything that stands out that you like about the product?
Yeah, I don't know like what the status of the features, but when I was able to actually log into the platform and get an
Mm.
understanding of like, again, this is probably tying back to more of my engineering, but like see kind of how the criteria is set and then
Yeah.
what is the candidate pool,
Yeah.
um, understanding expectations, and then also understanding like, okay, these things are kind of must-haves, which means I'm filtering the candidate pool versus these are the nice-to-haves, which means
Yeah.
I'm ranking candidates. I really like that. So I found that like in terms of just setting expectations. I
Yeah.
thought that was really cool and sort of gives you peace of mind and you're like, okay, I have
Yeah.
X many thousands of candidates that before I need to reevaluate options.
Right.
And also, I think oftentimes when you talk to recruiters, when you say, hey, I want this or that, there's no way to quantify the impact that you're having in terms of
Right.
candidate pool. And so getting that feedback was really cool. And I found that interesting. I think having the whole Slack setup of just approve reject, you know, similar to kind of the problem that Dosu is solving around keeping engineers in flow and like helping service those questions that are coming from other people that would normally they'd have to ping an engineer. I
Yeah.
feel like by not having to go into my email and either send those emails, send the rejections, send the kind of scheduling emails, that has been really nice in terms of just keeping kind of my workflow streamlined.
Cool. Awesome, man. Well, if you do have any other feedback, let us know. If you have any other thoughts, I am in that channel with Kyle, I think. And so, I do keep an eye on everything. So either way, thank you so much for your time and I hope you have a good week.
Yeah, likewise. It was great.
All right, man.
It was
Talk
great
to you later.
chatting and talk later.